It was a rainy afternoon when an elderly cat named Whiskers arrived at the city's shelter. His once sleek fur was now matted, his body was a little slower than before, and his eyes, though still bright, seemed to carry the weight of years lived. Whiskers had seen a lot in his time, times of comfort and warmth, but also periods of uncertainty and loss. For the past few weeks, his once caring owners had grown distant. They stopped making time for him, and soon, there was a moment when he found himself alone on the cold kitchen floor, his food bowl empty, his bed untouched. At first, Whiskers thought it was a mistake. They would come back, wouldn't they? But days stretched into weeks, and he slowly realized that his once familiar home was no longer his. It was at that moment, when the house grew emptier than it had ever been, that he was taken to the shelter. He was placed in a quiet corner of the room, far from the bustling activity of younger cats who were quickly scooped up by hopeful families. The shelter was cold, even with the warmth of its heating system. The constant shuffle of new faces, human and feline, filled the air with noise. But for Whiskers, it was all just a blur. He had lived many years before this, but here, he was simply a senior cat with an uncertain future. People came and went, often looking past him, drawn instead to the younger, more playful cats with bright, curious eyes. Whiskers wasn't angry, nor was he sad, though his heart felt the sting of abandonment. He simply sat in his little corner, watching the world go by, waiting for something he wasn't sure would ever come. Days passed, then weeks. Each time the door to his pen opened, Whiskers hoped for something, someone, to look at him with the same kind of affection that had once been his life. But people would glance at him with a sort of pity, pet him briefly, and then move on to the next young kitten who could chase a ball or purr like a motor. No one seemed to see the gentle soul within his old, weathered form. One particularly cold morning, just as the shelter doors creaked open to allow the first of the day's visitors inside, a woman entered. She was in her mid-40s, with soft eyes and a calm demeanor. Her hair was a little messy, as though she had just woken up and hurried to make it here before the rain could get heavier. She moved slowly through the shelter, taking in each pen with quiet observation. When she reached Whiskers' pen, she stopped. For a long moment, she simply watched him. He was curled up in a little ball on the bed, his tail wrapped around his paws, his golden eyes half-lidded. He didn't get up or try to greet her. He had learned long ago that humans often weren't there to stay. But this time, something was different. This woman bent down, her eyes softening as she gently extended a hand to his cage. "Hello there," she whispered, her voice kind and tender. "You're a sweet boy, aren't you?" Whiskers didn't move at first. But then, a spark of curiosity flickered in his heart. There was something in her voice, something warm and familiar. He cautiously stretched out a paw, resting it against the bars of the pen, and the woman smiled. The shelter worker, noticing the interaction, approached them. "He's one of our long-term residents," she explained. "He's a little older, so people tend to overlook him. But he's such a good boy, just a bit quiet." The woman nodded, her eyes never leaving Whiskers. "I can see that. How old is he?" "About 12, the worker answered. "He's been here for almost 2 months now. But he's still got a lot of love to give." The woman didn't say anything for a moment. She simply continued to watch the elderly cat, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. And then, finally, she spoke again, almost to herself, as if confirming something that had already begun to take root. "I think I'm meant to take him home." The worker smiled warmly. "I think he's been waiting for you, too." Whiskers, still unsure of what was happening, felt a tiny stirring in his chest. Could this be the start of something new? Could this be the moment when everything changed? The woman stood up and turned to the worker. "I'd like to adopt him, please." And just like that, in the rain-soaked silence of that shelter, Whiskers' world shifted. He wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, he felt something, hope. The car ride was longer than Whiskers expected. It wasn't a journey he had ever taken before, at least not in his memory. The woman, who had introduced herself as Laura, kept talking softly to him, though Whiskers was content to curl up on the soft blanket in the backseat. His whiskers twitched occasionally as he gazed out the window at the blurry world passing by, trees, buildings, and people, all unfamiliar and distant. The car eventually pulled into a driveway, and Laura opened the door, her movements gentle and slow. Whiskers wasn't sure what to expect, but the moment his paws hit the ground, the scent of the place was different. The air smelled warmer, cozier, with hints of fresh flowers and something that reminded him of old leather and wood, like the old armchair that had once been in his previous home, where he'd spend hours lounging. "This is home," Laura said softly as she picked him up, cradling him in her arms like a delicate treasure. Whiskers didn't protest. He allowed himself to be carried inside, his nose twitching as he absorbed the new smells. The house was bright, filled with windows that let in plenty of sunlight. There was a large sofa in the living room, a soft rug beneath his feet, and a few plants scattered around, their green leaves reaching for the sun. The scent of something warm, perhaps dinner, drifted from the kitchen, and Whiskers' stomach grumbled softly, reminding him of the days when he used to enjoy meals with his old family. But that was a lifetime ago, it seemed. Now, there was just this moment, and this woman who was now his caretaker. Laura set him down gently on the rug. "Take your time," she whispered. "You're safe here, Whiskers. You can explore if you want." Whiskers blinked slowly, taking in the room with cautious curiosity. The walls were painted a soft shade of blue, and there were little details everywhere that made the place feel like it had been lived in. A pile of books on the coffee table, a collection of family photos on the mantel, and a few framed paintings of landscapes hanging on the walls. It felt peaceful here, quiet in a way that was soothing. He padded over to the window, his paws sinking softly into the rug as he gazed outside. The world beyond was green and calm, and for a moment, he allowed himself to simply breathe. There was something reassuring about this place. It didn't feel like a shelter or a temporary stop, it felt like a home. Laura followed him, sitting down nearby. She let him explore at his own pace, content to sit and watch. She had always loved animals, and she had a deep understanding of the need for space and time, especially for someone like Whiskers, who had been through so much. The decision to adopt him had come to her in a quiet, unexpected moment. She hadn't been planning to bring a cat into her life, but when she had seen him in that shelter, so dignified despite his age, so gentle despite the world's hardships, she had felt something stir deep inside her. "Do you want to see your new bed?" she asked after a while, her voice gentle. "I set it up for you in the bedroom. It's soft, and you can sleep as much as you like." Whiskers looked at her for a moment, then turned his gaze toward the small hallway leading to what he assumed was the bedroom. The idea of a soft, warm bed did seem appealing, especially after the hard cot he'd had at the shelter. He padded slowly toward the hallway, his legs moving with the familiarity of habit, slow and steady, as though he'd done this 1,000 times before. Laura watched him for a moment, smiling to herself. She had a feeling he would settle in just fine. When Whiskers reached the bedroom, he was met with a small, cushioned bed placed by the window, a little blanket folded at the edge. There was a bowl of fresh water nearby, and a small dish of food that had already been prepared for him. The room had a calming energy to it, and the sunlight streaming through the window bathed the space in a warm, golden glow. Whiskers hesitated, his old bones aching slightly as he stretched out his limbs, but the comfort of the bed was undeniable. He sank into it, curling up in a perfect circle, the soft fabric pressing against his fur. The faint sounds of the house, the ticking of a clock, the rustle of leaves outside, calmed him, grounding him in this new reality. Laura sat on the bed beside him, gently stroking his fur. "I hope you like it here," she said softly. "This is your home now, Whiskers. No more waiting, no more wondering. You're part of our family." Whiskers purred in response, a sound so quiet that it was almost a whisper. He was tired, so very tired, but a deep sense of peace settled over him, like a soft blanket being draped over his heart. He wasn't alone anymore. There was no more uncertainty, no more fear of abandonment. Here, with Laura, he had found something he thought he had lost forever, a place to call home. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the room with dusky shades of pink and lavender, Whiskers closed his eyes. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt safe enough to rest. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led him to this moment, his forever home. And as he drifted into a peaceful slumber, a gentle voice echoed in his dreams, "You are loved, Whiskers. You are home." But as the night settled in and sleep claimed him fully, little did he know that his new life had only just begun. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet kind of joy that Whiskers had never known in his long life. Every morning, as the first light of dawn crept through the window, Laura would gently wake him with a soft voice and a tender touch. She'd smile as he stretched, his old limbs aching with the effort, but always, always happy to see her. Each day began with a warm breakfast, often served in the sunlit kitchen where Whiskers could bask in the glow of the morning sun. Laura would sit at the table with a cup of tea, chatting with him about her day as if he were a longtime friend, and Whiskers would listen intently. He didn't understand every word, of course, but he understood the tone, the kindness, the care, the comfort in her voice. And in return, he would nuzzle against her leg, a gentle reminder of his gratitude. The afternoons were spent lounging around the house, following Laura from room to room as she went about her daily tasks. He wasn't as spry as he had been in his younger years, but there was no rush. Time seemed to stretch out in this peaceful home, each moment steeped in the quiet rhythm of contentment. Whiskers would curl up on the couch, his favorite spot by the window, watching the world outside, occasionally blinking as the soft rays of sunlight bathed his fur. Though he was an elderly cat, Whiskers found that his days were not filled with rest alone. Laura would occasionally bring out a soft, feathery toy and dangle it in front of him. She had heard that older cats still enjoyed playing, albeit more slowly than their younger counterparts, and she wanted to give him the joy of those fleeting, playful moments. At first, Whiskers wasn't sure what to make of the toy. His days of chasing after things seemed long behind him. But as the feather bobbed gently in the air, a flicker of excitement stirred in his heart. He made a slow, deliberate swipe at the toy, his old claws barely catching the delicate feathers. Laura laughed softly, her eyes sparkling with happiness as she cheered him on. "That's it, Whiskers. You're still a pro at this." For the first time in what felt like forever, Whiskers felt something more than just the comfort of routine. He felt playful, alive. He might be older, his steps slower, but the joy of life still lingered deep within him. And in those moments of slow-motion play, as he batted at the feather or chased after the occasional rolling ball, Whiskers remembered what it felt like to be young. He felt the warmth of life surging through his veins again. It wasn't just the days that brought peace and comfort, it was the nights as well. When the world outside grew dark and quiet, Laura would turn on the lamp next to the couch, casting a soft, golden light across the room. She would curl up with a book or her knitting, and Whiskers would settle into his favorite spot beside her, purring contentedly as she gently stroked his fur. Sometimes, she would hum softly, the melody filling the space with a soothing harmony. Whiskers would close his eyes, and the soft rhythm of her presence would lull him into a state of blissful relaxation. In these quiet evenings, the house felt more like a sanctuary. The constant hum of life, the rhythm of love and care, wrapped around him like a soft blanket, keeping him safe and warm. One evening, after a particularly peaceful day of lounging in the sun and savoring a dinner of fresh salmon, Laura did something that made Whiskers' heart swell with affection. She sat down beside him, her hands soft and gentle as she cradled his head in her lap. It wasn't something she had done often. Laura respected his need for space, but tonight, she seemed to sense that Whiskers was ready. He allowed himself to lean into her touch, his old head resting against her lap, his eyes half closed in pure contentment. "You're so special, Whiskers," Laura murmured as she stroked his fur. "I'm so glad you're here with me. I promise I'll take care of you for the rest of your days." For a long time, Whiskers simply lay there, savoring the comfort of her words and the warmth of her presence. He didn't need much now, just this. The companionship, the love, the certainty that this, at long last, was his home. As the seasons changed and the days grew shorter, Laura kept her promise. She made sure that Whiskers had everything he needed: fresh food, cozy beds, and endless love. There were trips to the vet to make sure he stayed healthy, though his steps had slowed even more as the months passed. She always told him how handsome he was, even when his fur was more silver than it had been when he was younger. She never once seemed to mind the occasional mistake he made, perhaps knocking over a vase or forgetting where he'd left his favorite toy. Through it all, Whiskers knew one thing for sure: he was loved. He had found a place where he belonged, where age was no obstacle to the care and devotion he received. He had found peace. On one particularly serene evening, as the moonlight bathed the living room in silver, Whiskers lay curled up in his favorite spot by the window, watching the stars twinkle above. His eyes, though aged, still held that spark of wonder that had once made him explore every corner of the world. He had no more worries, no more fears. He had found his forever home, the place where he would be cared for, cherished, and loved until the end of his days. And so, as the night deepened, and the sounds of the world faded away, Whiskers closed his eyes with a contented purr, drifting into peaceful slumber. There was no more searching. He had found his place, his eternal home. And there, nestled in the warmth of love, he would stay forever.